Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Thank you for coming. Nice to see your enthusiasm in devotional service. Last night, one proposition was given to me, which I'd like to speak about. It's the second time I've heard it in this visit to Croatia. I heard it in Zagreb also. The idea that it is necessary for our devotees to have university degrees so that people will respect them when they preach. This is bogus. There are many bogus ideas, which, just like fashions, some of them become more popular at one time and then another one comes. Just like you'll see in women's fashions, they all go round and round again. At one time it's fashionable to have a dress down to here, then halfway up, and then all the way up, and then down again. And sometimes it's fashionable to have your hair this way, and sometimes that way. So in the same way within our society, sometimes one misconception becomes popular, then another one. During the 11 or 12 years that Srila Prabhupada was preaching Krishna consciousness in his world mission, he answered all these different misconceptions. They all came up. And Prabhupada made the position very clear on all of them. So it just so happened that one of Prabhupada's disciples wrote him a letter expressing his desire to go back to university to get a university degree, so that people would be more respectful when he preached. Prabhupada wrote back and said, it is not necessary. People will respect us on our own standard, on following the principles and hearing from the spiritual master. Prabhupada wrote that if they're not prepared to accept us on that principle, then we don't care for them. Now, Prabhupada also wanted the Bhaktivedanta Institute. He gave a lot of importance to this. This is for preaching to scientists and scholars, particularly scientists, because these people, they are misleading the world with their wrong ideas. Therefore, if some of the leading intellectuals can be convinced of the Krishna conscious position, through them our preaching will have a very great effect. So Prabhupada's idea he said that to be a fellow of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, the minimum qualification is a master's degree. But he didn't send devotees to college to get a master's degree. Those who were already joining with degrees, he engaged them in this. In other words, it is possible to make devotees from people with university degrees, even if we don't have them, because that was going on in that time, and it's going on at this time also. In other words, if someone already has a university degree, all well and good. That can be used in preaching. Used in preaching means it gains some respect among a certain class of people. I don't know about in this country, but in most countries in the Western world, most people don't care less whether you have a degree or not. Do people give a lot of importance to university degrees here? When you go to preach to them about Krishna consciousness, do they ask you if you have a university degree? Mostly people see how much money you have. That is considered the sign of respectability. So that was one of the fashions at one time in our society. That you have to have Volvo cars and Ray-Ban sunglasses and a Rolex watch. And then it's good for preaching. You have to be respectable by material standards. So all the devotees were busy selling paintings so they could have enough money to be respectable. And no one was distributing books, which Prabhupada emphasized as the most important preaching. Prabhupada said that know it for certain there is no more important means of preaching than distributing my books. But sometimes in the course of our mental ramblings, we come up with brilliant ideas. Really fantastic ideas. And then we follow this, this is really great for preaching. But what happens is that by association with the material energy, so many of our devotees go back to being materialists. So it is very important preaching to intellectuals, that's true. But it's not meant for every devotee, nor is it necessary for preaching to the general masses. Most people can be approached with Prabhupada's books, with Harinam Sankirtan, Prasadam, festivals, all these different programs. People are actually much more impressed when they see that devotees are so happy and leading a pure life. People are much more impressed by that, because there are thousands of university degree holders. But how many people are there who are shining with happiness of spiritual joy? That is our actual asset, which no amount of money or material so-called qualification can give you. And it's not that you have to have a university degree before you can preach Krishna consciousness. You can preach to intellectuals by studying Prabhupada's books. Because even from the external point of view, if someone has a thorough knowledge of Prabhupada's books, that's at least equivalent to any university degree. I meet professors and intellectuals in different parts of the world, and they often presume that I have a university degree. In fact, many times it's happened to me several times that they don't believe I don't have a university degree, because they think that the ability to speak and discuss intellectual ideas has to come through this academic training. But they don't know the academic training we get in this Krishna consciousness movement. We regularly have classes, we regularly discuss philosophy. Even among intellectuals, how many of them will you find discussing philosophy? They'll do their job in science or whatever, then they'll go home and drink beer and watch the TV like any idiot. Our method of learning is different to the mundane method. Study is there. Study is there. But knowledge doesn't come simply by study. Knowledge comes by advancement in Krishna consciousness. Yasya deve para bhakte yata deve tata guru tasyaite katita hyartha prakashante mahatmanaha. Who knows the meaning of this verse? Very important verse.
That only by the faith, if one has firm faith in Guru and Krishna, then the whole meaning of Vedic literatures, just by that,
yeah, one who has faith in Guru and Krishna, to him all the imports of the Vedic literature are revealed. A devotee becomes enlightened in transcendental knowledge by the grace of Krishna. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te. Krishna says, to those who worship me with love, I give the knowledge by which they can come to me. So this is knowledge. That Krishna states in Gita, etat jnanam, this is knowledge. And everything which is not in the line of Krishna consciousness, that is not actually knowledge. In the universities, they're not teaching knowledge, they're teaching ignorance. They're teaching how to become more fixed in ignorance. The underlying philosophy in all the subjects in the universities is, you are this body, you are not spirit soul, human life is meant for sense enjoyment. And that's why you'll often find that the so-called intellectuals are the most degraded people, especially in sexual matters and intoxication. That's why Srila Prabhupada said that the modern education, these institutions, they're like slaughterhouses, because they destroy the spiritual inclinations. One devotee I know, he went to Oxford University, which is of course highly respected as a great educational institution. So when he first went, he told me that the first day he went, they had a meeting of fresh students. So one professor, very respected, addressed the students. He said, the most important thing you have to learn at Oxford is how to hold your drink. You know what that means, to hold your drink? To hold your drink means you can drink half a bottle of whiskey and still stand up. You have to be a hardened drinker, that's what he was saying. He said that you can go through life without a degree, but you can't go throughout life without learning to hold your drink. So slaughterhouse. I know myself, when I was a kid at school, everyone was expecting me to go to university. But I didn't want to go at all. And everyone was telling me, well, you have to go. In future, you'll regret it. So I was refusing in so many ways. And one of my teachers said that, well, you should go anyway to university. You get in some course where you don't have to study too much. Then at least for 3 or 4 years you don't have to work. You can just go to parties and have a good time. So then if I had any doubts about not going to university after hearing that, I was completely convinced. Because I was thinking, all these people, they just follow the same way of life. They're all miserable. Why should I follow them? They have no higher purpose in life. They're just going through the system, being exploited. So everyone was aghast, shocked, dismayed, and told me that in future you will regret it if you don't go to university. But I never regretted it. I'm very grateful to Krishna that I was saved from that. So, of course, if devotees, if someone comes to Krishna consciousness and they're already at the university, then they can finish the course. Prabhupada approved that. But if people are coming from material life frustrated, as any sensible person should be. And they come to get the real life of Krishna consciousness. And then we tell them, go to university. Vishva Vidyalayam Tena Gantavyam, as if it's a Vedic injunction. He should go to university. It's like getting a knife and stabbing them in the heart, destroying their spiritual propensities. And then you'll find someone who's got a university degree, devotee, thinking, oh, I'm better. These devotees, they're not as good as me because I have a university degree. So don't be misled by bogus propaganda. It goes on within our movement, not only outside our movement. And so many people have so many different ideas, which they're getting from I don't know where. Not from reading Srila Prabhupada's books, that's for sure. Because if you read Prabhupada's books, every few pages you'll come across a statement like this, that there is no material qualification required to be a devotee. So I recommend don't study all these kami books, study Prabhupada's books. Then you will get the absolute truth, 100%. You'll be enlightened by just like the sun, when the sun rises. Tesham aditya vajjnanam prakashyati tatparam. When the sun rises, everything is revealed. So in the same way, when transcendental knowledge arises in the heart, everything is understood. And you can go all over the world and you can meet any kinds of people and preach to them. You see, Prabhupada met with scholars, scientists, journalists, leaders of different religious groups, so many different kinds of people. He didn't study all their different philosophies, but he knew Shastra and he had firm faith in Krishna. And Krishna inspired him to say exactly the right thing, so that he always found out what was wrong in their philosophy and established Krishna consciousness. And even if you do study at the university, then how much are you going to know anyway? Say you get a degree in 19th century Serbian political history, for instance. Well, that's useless for preaching to someone else who's got a degree in genetical chains in South African grasshoppers. So better to become absorbed in this knowledge of Prabhupada's books, which extinguishes the blazing fire of material existence, which gives us knowledge of Krishna, which knowledge we are so fortunate to get after millions of births of being Dr. Frog. Now we have the opportunity to enter into actual knowledge. So as Prabhupada told one of his sannyasi disciples, if you ever get time, read my books. That is good advice for everybody, for all devotees. Especially you're living in this situation where there's no standard temple situation. So in this situation it's more important to go deeply into Prabhupada's books. Don't be misled by wrong propaganda, even if it's coming from someone who's within this movement. You should know what Prabhupada says. And then you can recognize who is speaking according to what Prabhupada says. And you can recognize who's not speaking according to what Prabhupada says. So you can then just follow what those who are strictly following Prabhupada, what they say. Otherwise you'll get so many different ideas coming up. So many wonderful new ways to preach. Prabhupada wrote in another letter that Lord Chaitanya spread Krishna consciousness by chanting and dancing and distributing prasadam. And we're also doing that with very good effect all over the world. Yeah. So if it was good enough for Lord Chaitanya, it's good enough for me, it should be good enough for everybody else too. See, this movement has spread all over the world. There are hundreds of reviews of scholars appreciating Prabhupada's books. These books are in the university libraries all over the world. It's not that this movement spread all over the world, but now we just discovered what's wrong with this movement, that our devotees all don't have college degrees. If we all get college degrees, then all of a sudden Krishna consciousness will take over the whole world instantly. These are misconceptions. Let us try to become pure, advanced in Krishna consciousness. Develop Vaishnava qualities such as humility, tolerance, compassion. Become fixed in Krishna consciousness. Purity is the force. Books are the basis. This simple formula Prabhupada gave us. We don't need to introduce any new ideas. Not only do we not need to introduce new ideas, but if we do, then we'll end up with chaos, that's all. So let us stick to the simple process which Prabhupada has given us. Anande bolo Hari Bhaja Vrindavan, Shri Guru Vaishnava Pade Mojayaman. Chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Worship Vrindavan and the Lord of Vrindavan. Don't worship some atheistic philosopher thinking he's so great. And absorb our mind in the service of Sri Guru and the Vaishnavas. That is the happy life of Krishna consciousness. We shouldn't be influenced by what a few nonsense people in the newspapers say. A few people think that this movement, it's just some kind of sentimental cult. Our devotees dress in a strange way, and this strange paint on their forehead, singing and dancing in the streets. It's not very sophisticated. You wouldn't find any university professor doing that. Well, actually we do, because university professors also join our movement, being sick of the dried, hypocritical life in the universities. They come to Krishna consciousness for some real juice, which you'll never get even if you learn the whole Encyclopedia Britannica and stuff it in your head. There's no juice in material life. There's no ras. It seems like that. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could study so many things? It's so interesting. Just like sometimes you may pick up some book and it looks very interesting, some Kami book, and it's very well written with interesting ideas. But what do you get from reading it? Just your heart feels dry. There's no Krishna consciousness there. What to speak of all these Kami books? Narad Muni even rejected Vyasadeva from writing Vedic literatures without any conception of Krishna. He chastised him. This is abominable. Jugupsitam, he used that word. Why are you writing all these books and there's nothing about Krishna? After millions and millions of lifetimes, we finally come to the point, now to learn something about Krishna. And then, no, I'll go and study microbiology instead. You can study microbiology at very close quarters. At very close quarters. You can study very scrutinizingly in your next life as a germ. But we don't want to become germs in stool. We want to go back to Godhead and dance with Krishna. And that is possible by becoming Krishna conscious, which is possible by surrendering to Krishna according to the parampara system. So don't worry, everything's alright. The process given by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita 5,000 years ago, and previously to that 130 million years ago, still works. The process that Prabhupada gave us, it hasn't got out of date, nor will it ever do so. We're very happy to announce that Krishna consciousness is still as blissful as ever. Krishna hasn't gone on strike, he's still as merciful as ever. The nectar of the holy names is still there, and we can still preach Krishna consciousness all over the world by the same method. We may not think it's very sophisticated. Let other people think what they like. We shouldn't fall into that trap. Lord Chaitanya was criticized in the same way by the Mayavadi sannyasis of Varanasi. That why are you simply jumping and dancing? Sannyasis aren't supposed to dance. They're supposed just to study Vedanta and be very serious and say Om. That Prakashananda Saraswati criticized Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He called him a bhavuk, which means a sentimentalist. So Lord Chaitanya spoke with him, and he defeated him on the grounds of philosophy. So we can do that also. We'll dance and chant, and people who are more simple-hearted, they will appreciate. And if we have to discuss with intellectuals who are doubtful, we will do that on the basis of Prabhupada's books. And they will be impressed when they are defeated by the knowledge from Prabhupada's book. This is our process. Let us stick to it and spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. Don't go this way or that way, go straight back to Godhead. Hare Krishna. All glories to the holy name of Krishna. Is there any question?
Sometimes someone may argue that if one has a higher education, it's easier to earn money so that he can refuse some grihastha.
That's a completely different thing. We're talking about So we're talking about the idea that you have to get a degree so you can preach. If someone is a grihastha, he has to earn money somehow or other. Of course, Prabhupada recommended that our grihasthas live simply off the land so they can be away from the influence of this degrading so-called civilization. But if a grihastha, for the sake of earning money to maintain his family, feels it necessary to get a university degree, that's not objectionable. But those who have come to this movement on the basis of Prabhupada's books, we don't have to send them, they don't have any degree, and we have to send them out to university to get a degree. That's not required. It's a crazy idea. We need so many people to preach Krishna consciousness, and we want to send them all to universities, and 90% anyway won't maintain their Krishna consciousness in that situation. They'll pick up all wrong ideas. We need devotees to go and distribute Prabhupada's books, to hold festivals and distribute prasadam.
As I understand, the basic difference between Western and Eastern philosophy is that the Western philosopher sees himself as an external, independent observer who studies reality out there, whereas the Eastern philosophy, his goal is self-realization.
Yeah, actually, did you finish saying what you were going to say?
Not completely. And science in the West is so fundamentally rooted in this idea that it seems very important to me.
As Western or Eastern philosophy, because philosophy means love of truth. But what has come to be known as philosophy in the Western world, which isn't actually, it is as you say a armchair speculation, devoid of the quest for self-realization. Actually, whatever in the Western world passes philosophy, even the so-called most advanced philosophers, they don't even reach to the beginning of what's taught in Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada, he reviewed many of the Western philosophers, and he said Jung was the best, because Jung almost reached the point of understanding we're not this body, which is the beginning of first teaching in Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada said Socrates was self-realized because he understood he wasn't the body. That doesn't mean he was God-realized, but he understood this basic point. So actually we have nothing to gain by studying these different philosophers. But the Western world, which is misled by these so-called philosophers, they have much to gain by getting Prabhupada's books. In which that point is stressed, that the goal of knowledge is self-realization. Actually, the way Prabhupada analyzed the Western philosophers wouldn't accept it as, within their terms, as proper philosophical analysis. Because he mostly said they're all nonsense, which they are. If anyone did make some good point, Prabhupada would accept it also, often qualifying it. Often qualifying it means giving the point its proper context, that is, within Krishna consciousness. Philosophy begins with epistemology. Epistemology means how do we understand anything? Methods of gaining knowledge. In the Western system, it is by observation and speculation. That's called science. Observation, hypothesis, experiment, and conclusion. But within the Vedic system, this is rejected because we have imperfect senses, the tendency to make mistakes, we're illusioned, and we have the cheating propensity. Mistakes, illusion, imperfect senses. Therefore, the whole Western approach to philosophy is flawed from the very beginning. The Vedic system of receiving knowledge is to receive knowledge from a perfect source. This Prabhupada discussed in some detail when he met with Gregory Benford, PhD in physics in California. That Prabhupada established that any endeavor to receive knowledge without receiving it from perfect source must result in imperfection, which is not actually knowledge. That knowledge is not knowledge. That Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, Shevidda abidda jani. Now I know that knowledge which I considered to be so wonderful is all ignorance. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was brought up as a secular, liberal intellectual of the day. And later he very much regretted having wasted so much of his life. Vidyabilashe katainukal paramashahashayami. With great enthusiasm, I wasted so much of my life, he says, in these so-called intellectual pursuits. So that ignorance which Bhaktivinoda Thakur regretted having wasted his time in, we shouldn't be enthusiastic to waste our time in. In that song, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, what is that? What is that? I quote it so many times because this topic comes up all the time. Jeev ke anitya samsare moha janamya. Joro bidda joto mayar bhaibhav tomar bhajane badha. Moha janamya anitya samsare jeev ke ghare gadha. His conclusion is that materialistic knowledge is simply another display of Maya. And it is an obstacle in the progressive path of Krishna consciousness. Within this temporary material world, it simply increases our ignorance and makes us into asses. Why an ass? Well, an ass carries heavy weights which are of no value to him. He carries around big bundles of wood or the clothes of the washerman, very heavy. They have no benefit to him whatsoever. So in the same way, the so-called intellectual carries huge amounts of knowledge around in his head, which are of no actual benefit to him. Another thing is that the donkey is a great preacher and poet. Do you have donkeys here?